Hey everyone, Robert here, author of Expansion Mastery, the practical guide to living a fully engaged life. Are you ready to start living life to the fullest? Are you ready and willing to transform your life from ordinary to extraordinary? Then welcome, my friends, to the Fully Engaged Life. Welcome back to the show, my friends. So, this is all about living a fully engaged life. And we know that living a fully engaged life begins by raising our consciousness, by attaining a higher state of consciousness, which is known as mindfulness. And I'm referring again to the specific practices of what is known as mindfulness, not as some loose Western definition. So this mindfulness allows us to live a fully engaged life because we are more present. We are more engaged with life itself and with reality all around us. Mindfulness comes down to this. Mindfulness is a higher state of consciousness that prevents us from unconsciously lapsing back into our old habitual thoughts, mental patterns, emotions, and lower vibration. When we are capable of remaining more consciously aware, we are more awake, alert, and alive, and that's when we are fully engaged. I discussed the idea of balancing the entire brain, activating and balancing the entire brain, right? That was in the previous episode. Understanding how to shift ourselves from left brain to right brain and then to activate the entire brain. This too speaks to living a fully engaged life. We cannot live a fully engaged life when we are locked in the left brain, when we are living in a perception of separateness and ego domination. So that brings us to this. We need to realize something very important about spirituality. We need to understand that the minds that brought us the practices, the rituals, the sutras, the scriptures, and so on, it is not the same type of mind as those utilizing, implementing, and reading those things. All of the tools are recorded and passed down by those who have attained a sense of awakening, at least to some degree. Now, they've done this through their own experience with these practices, and then they went back and recorded them. So from this, we can understand that developing these things was not a left brain activity. Although when we engage them, when we're new or when we're reading things like sutras and scriptures and things, we are reading them from the left brain. So there's this massive disconnect in understanding. They're passing material down from an awakened mind, not one that still sleeps. They have transcended the ordinary mind and have attained an extraordinary state of being. And when the ordinary mind begins to interact with these things, the only way it can be understood is superficially, so that the ordinary mind is incapable of perceiving the true meaning of whatever it is. If it's a practice, if it's a ritual, if it's a scripture, that mind is incapable of comprehending what an awakened mind actually refers to. This is one of the ways that esoteric teachings are hidden in plain sight, because you can't understand the esoteric nature of it when your mind has a perception that is based in an exoteric perspective. Allow me to provide you with a couple examples of what I mean. I'm constantly bombarded with instance after instance on social media of people giving their opinion or what they believe something means about a spiritual quote or some spiritual matter. And they don't understand what it refers to at all. The other day, someone made a statement that was referring to this. Living in the present moment is dangerous because if we don't hold on to our past, we learn nothing. This is spoken like a true academic, and it illustrates the fact that this is a very superficial understanding for living in the present moment. Okay, so is it correct in what it's saying in a very superficial way? Yes, but when the person is referring to the present moment as they were in this context as being a bad thing, this is why we shouldn't engage in this sort of spiritual practice, then they are completely misguided. They themselves have no direct interaction with the practices that lead to experiencing what is meant by the present moment. Living in the present moment doesn't mean that we ignore everything from the past or future. It means that we are consciously awake and aware in each present moment, the depth of which can only be grasped, can only be known and understood through directly experiencing it. And that generally takes the application and interaction of certain practices to help us attain this. But this has always been the case. Those in academia always believe, falsely enough, that they understand everything, but everything they're doing is left brain. So the best that they get out of it is something incredibly superficial. And it may hold truth, but it's not what's being referred to by spiritualists. See, this is where there's a massive disconnect between those of the left brain and those of the right brain. So an academically based person, a scholar, a teacher, what have you, is going to be left brain. And when they're left brain, they look at a statement like the present moment. They look at this kind of topic and they see it one way, and that way is a very superficial understanding based upon only that which they've read and studied. And that does not allow you to truly grasp what is meant by something like the present moment. Now, someone of the right brain, or activating the whole brain, someone who has worked with this spiritual type of practice to attain the ability to hold their conscious awareness in the present moment, they understand this practice as something completely different. So in a way, these people are in two totally different dimensions, right? They're looking at things from two very different perspectives. Now, the interesting thing is this, that a scholar looking at this is totally incapable of understanding the spiritual aspect of it, whereas the spiritual-based person is capable of understanding the more superficial version as well. See how it works? So the key is, if you haven't directly interacted with it yourself, if you haven't gone through the practices, if you haven't attained the ability to interact directly with the idea of being in the present moment, fully aware in that moment, then you cannot speak legitimately as to what it is or is not. You cannot apply it to things and say that that spiritual practice is not valid, is not beneficial, because you don't know. You're speaking on pure conjecture at that point. And right now, social media and the internet in general is filled with this superficial left brain speculation about spiritual practices. And this is causing an entirely false and fake perspective of what true spirituality is about, and in turn favors and bolsters the ego-dominated mind. Right? So this kind of perspective is very important. It's the same thing. I use this with my students a lot. If I have a mountain bike and I say, oh, I'm mountain biking, and yet I'm riding that mountain bike on the city street, am I really mountain biking? No, not really. If you are mountain biking, you have one of those bikes and you're up in the mountains, actually biking in the mountains, right? This is what is meant by that. But a lot of people think if they just have the equipment that they are doing that activity. And see, this satisfies the ego. But this is a sort of inverted logic that is being perpetuated out there to the masses. It's the same thing. If I wear a pair of running shoes, but I'm sitting in a chair all day, can I say I'm running? No, of course not. Of course not. So this is what we need to understand before we spread our opinion and speculation about things that we really don't understand because of a faulty sense of perception. It's the same thing if I say, I study with this particular teacher, spiritual teacher, martial arts teacher, whatever. Oh, I study with them. Really? When did you meet them? Oh, I never met them, but I've met them through their books. And so therefore I can say I've studied with them. No, you really can't, because you did not. You did not receive any formal transmission from that teacher at all. So you can't say that. But the mind that is egoic in nature will have you believe that that's valid. Here's another example if we look at something in reference to economics. And I heard this again just yesterday. How some politicians live in the moment because they don't pay the city's bills or act with a sense of fiscal responsibility, spending all the money on what the needs are in the moment at the present time instead of planning to cover things for the future, such as pensions. And I believe this was in reference to some things that were going on in New York. So I feel badly for those of you in New York that would be impacted by such a thing, but rest assured it's going on by these corrupt politicians everywhere. So again, this person refers to the present moment as sort of a spiritual thing when they're talking. They're not just saying, it's something that they're doing is they're paying the things that they need right now to stay afloat instead of putting aside for the future. No, what they're referring to is that this present moment, being in the present moment, is bad, and this is one of the ways that it manifests as being bad. This has nothing to do with the here and now, the present moment of spirituality actually being in the present moment. But we're seeing these type of things being used, this type of terminology is being used, and it's causing an incredible sense of confusion. And it's taking people away from authentic spiritual practices because they start to believe that they're bad. And believing something is bad or doesn't have benefit or whatever is a lot easier than making the effort necessary to engage the practices to find out for ourselves, isn't it? This is a mental trap that many, many people fall into. So if we understand this then, those of ordinary mind read something, and then they believe they understand it, at least to some degree. But their mind formulates some sort of rational understanding of the material, and that's when things go astray. So when somebody of ordinary mind reads a religious scripture or a religious text or starts to study a particular practice, they falsely form an understanding that has them believe that they grasp the material. But it's all left brain, and they're thinking about it, and this causes a rational explanation to be formed so that the mind can form the belief that it understands it. But as I tell my martial students as well as spiritual students and clients, a lot of what we're dealing with here is irrational. It doesn't mean it's not real, it's just irrational. And you can understand what that means more when you operate from the right brain. You can't understand that because everything is rational when you are of the left brain. I've recently had a number of my private students come out and visit, and it's always a fantastic time because these are incredibly skilled people and amazing friends. And with the level of training that all of these people are at now, we are into some pretty deep things. So a lot of it, if you use your left brain and you're thinking about it and you're trying to make this happen, you're trying to force it, you're trying to get it right, you're trying, you actually prevent yourself from being able to do it well. But if you accept the fact that it doesn't coincide with any sense of rational thought, of reasoning for how it can be done, and you just accept that it's irrational and you stop thinking about it and you just do it, you set your intention on it and then you just do it, all of a sudden you can have it happen. And it's really interesting to watch the expressions on their faces when this happens. It's very satisfying, I have to say. It's wonderful because they're absolutely shocked that they were able to accomplish it without trying. And that's the only way you can accomplish some of the irrational things that you get into in the higher levels of spirituality, of martial arts, of all of these different types of activities. So we have to realize that we cannot truly understand spirituality or any of the topics that it contains through reading, through left brain, through studying. Everything has to be engaged. Everything has to be practiced. We have to have the experience of those things to truly grasp its meaning. And until we have directly experienced it over time, then we cannot possibly claim to understand. Because only after we have attained the same state of heightened consciousness that the people who have recorded these things and passed them on, can we ever begin to understand their true meaning. And this again is how the esoteric is hidden in plain sight, right under the nose of those who hold an exoteric perspective of things. So someone of ordinary mind reads something spiritual and they'll formulate an infinite amount of misinterpretations. The way that people are viewing the present moment, the here and now, that specific topic, which the incredible author Eckhart Tolle so eloquently writes about in all of his books, is greatly misunderstood. There are misinterpretations, misunderstandings, and all kinds of incorrect assumptions being made to what it is. And the only way that you can actually understand what Mr. Tolle and others are writing about in the book, what spiritual systems have had for thousands of years inside them when it comes to these teachings, is to actually engage in the formal practices that allow you to interact with that present moment, to raise your sense of consciousness, your awareness to a level where you are consciously aware in the moment. The mind is no longer dwelling in the past or the future. It's understanding this moment and each moment that is the everlasting now. And that in no way implies that you don't learn from the past or that you don't plan for the future. It means that you live your life with your consciousness based in the moment. Because when we live in the left brain, we are constantly flipping from thoughts about the past to the future, to the past to the future, back and forth, thousands of times all day long, and that's where we dwell, everywhere but in the present moment. And that's one of the reasons why people are said to be asleep, because their mind is everywhere except for right now, when and where they're actually living. So it's a kind of sleep, and when we awaken, we are awakened to reality, to the moment, to this present time, the here, the now. And the practices of mindfulness are one of the things that lead us to this ability to live in the present moment in a positive and highly beneficial way. And it allows us to raise our consciousness to where we can do that. Because if you're living in a low-level consciousness, such as that of ordinary mind, when you're locked in the left brain, when you're basically sleepwalking through life, you haven't awakened. You're not living a fully engaged life. Nor are you capable of understanding any of the spiritual perspective of things. You have to get involved. You have to engage the practices, because it is those practices that act as doorways to these types of awakenings that allow us to no longer be of ordinary mind, to be free of that mind, to transcend the mind, and to unlock our consciousness, to attain a higher state of consciousness, and to be truly aware and awake of what is going on, of life in general. And this is when you're living fully engaged. This is how you start to see what others can't see. You start to understand what others can't understand. It all comes from these type of practices. So I caution you about forming opinions on spiritual topics just from reading them. And I caution you about spreading your opinion of these things until you have honestly spent a fair amount of time engaged in these practices, doing them for yourself, so that you can end up attaining the benefit. And then from there you can make a decision whether you like it or whether you don't. But I'll guarantee the outcome's only going to be one thing. And that's why spiritual practices were put in place. That's why they've been part of human life ever since the beginning of human life. So be careful as you read things. Be careful not to outrightly dismiss it before you have a chance to really engage it and develop a true understanding for it. Sometimes believing that we understand something can be a very dangerous and detrimental thing. So realize when you're reading and studying a practice that it is only a superficial understanding that you are able to attain until you engage that practice. And then understand if you're reading something like a scripture, right? It doesn't matter what system that comes from, or even from a religion, right? Most of people read the Bible and they take it very literally. They look at those things as, oh, that must have actually physically happened. And that is not at all how those things are written. The Bible is written as a parable, right? There's a lot of esoteric meaning in what is being written there. It's not meant to be taken at face value, but the left brain will take it at face value and then try to form a belief that it actually happened that way. And that can lead to living in a world of delusion and false beliefs. So it doesn't matter what religious system. We have to be careful. We have to understand that all of these scriptures and things were written by awakened minds and cannot be understood directly through the ordinary mind. And this is why it is stressed in the older teachings that we are not here to recite things mindlessly, recite sutras or mantras or whatever mindlessly and pray and worship to Buddha or to Jesus Christ. We are here to become like Buddha, to become like Jesus Christ, right? The idea is we are supposed to become that. That's telling us, as esoteric speak, for saying you have to engage in that. You have to walk the same path they walked. You have to engage in the same practices they engaged in order to attain that state of higher consciousness. It doesn't matter how many times you read a scripture or how many times you read that Bible at night. It isn't going to do you any good unless you have the practices to engage it so that you can actually directly experience those teachings. And I'm sharing all of this because now we are at a point in time where people are of a state of mind where they believe they can just make things up and that it's real. Because they have an opinion of it, it's right and it's real. And this is not true. This is one of the extreme dangers that has arisen out of social media. So be careful and think for yourselves and make sure that you're interacting with the material. Remember what I say. It's taking that knowledge and then putting it into action, experiencing it, that allows you to attain wisdom. And all of these things, scriptures, sutras, the practices, they were all created. They were all brought together and recorded and passed on by those who have attained very high degrees of wisdom and higher states of consciousness. Also, Thanksgiving is right around the corner, so I want to wish everyone who celebrates Thanksgiving a wonderful, wonderful holiday. Please make sure and take advantage of it. Share your appreciation and gratitude with all of those who you love in your life, all your friends, your family, anyone around you. If you forget most of the year, at least use this holiday to remember. You can never go wrong with sharing your appreciation. I certainly love and appreciate every one of you who tune into this podcast and follow my material. And I hope that you have a wonderful, warm holiday where you can enjoy yourself, you can enjoy those around you, and those around you are capable of enjoying you. Please share your appreciation with everyone that you can on that day and every day to follow. If you're not sure how to do that, you can pick up the Appreciation Mastery Program, an incredibly powerful audio program that I created. You can buy it exclusively at www.expansionmastery.com. Make sure and get some for your friends and family. Get the word out, get these authentic teachings out there, and most importantly, make sure that you are engaging them. Doesn't do you any good to just sit and listen to the CDs. You have to actually engage the practices that I share. If you do that, you will reap the rewards. So until next week, my friends, I wish you the very best in all of your practices and your life, and have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving. Take care.